Hey, welcome back to the Ford 4R70W transmission rebuild series, part 2. This is going to consist of removal of the valve body, manual shift components, parking pawl, overdrive servo, accumulator pistons, extension housing, and a few other items along the way. My name is Lance, and sit back, relax, enjoy this video. I hope it's educational for you, and let's get rolling with it.
At this part, I'm going to go ahead and remove the TCC solenoid and shift solenoids A and B. O-rings look good, good shape. TCC solenoid. Just bear in mind that we did test these earlier, so we do know that they are good units. The bolts, by the way, you do want to remember where your bolts go. Essentially, your main valve body bolts are the shouldered bolts. They have the shouldered head on them, and then you have the standard bolt heads right here that we will leave intact for now. We're just looking to get the main bolts out to loosen the valve body here in just a moment. I like to just go through. I'm just going to go ahead and loosen them all up, just break them loose. I like to do it in a fairly, it's kind of a sequential and evenly distributed loosening order, if you will. Okay, should be 23 of these. And we can check that. 12 of them on this dark gray plate. And then we have 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. This one here may not need to be loosened up. We'll find out. I like to use my cordless to get them zipped on out of there. It's a little bit quicker. Another note on disassembling the transmission, any transmission, just be sure that you have a clean workspace, that you have a good bench top to where you can lay your parts out in the order that they were removed, and you've got no dirt or anything that might contaminate the parts. But at any rate, just make sure you have a clean work area, and that you basically put all the parts in the order that they come apart and go back together. Save you a lot of trouble. One little quick side note here on this bolt, one of the main valve body bolts. This actually holds the bracket down to keep the EPC solenoid in position, kind of lock it in. It's got a locking collar. I'm going to go ahead and remove that, and I'll set it on the table out of the way. So just a little quick note there. I usually just remove this out separately. And then once this is loose, then we're ready to start disassembling our manual shift detent lever and the lever shaft right here. First thing I'm going to do in order to get these parts out of the transmission case, there's a roll pin right here that helps retain the manual lever shaft in its position. There's also a nut on the end of that shaft that we'll have to loosen up, and in the process of taking this shaft out, we'll loosen this nut up and get it out. But the first thing is getting this roll pin, this retaining pin, out of the way. Alright, this pin here, what I like to do is take a shop towel, some type of protective cloth, lay it over the transmission case, because we don't want to gouge or scar the case unnecessarily in any way. I'll take a pair of wire cutters, kind of like these here, and I will grab the pin like so, and then rotate the wire cutters so the pressure is on the cloth here and not directly on any transmission part. And as you can see, this pin will come right on out just like so, and it just rolls right, it'll cam itself right out, and you've done no damage to the transmission case. I'm going to go ahead and get the valve body out of the way here before we remove these pieces, the manual shift lever pieces. Sometimes the valve body might be a little bit sticky. You can take a shop cloth. At one point there's a slot over here on this side of the valve body that you can take a screwdriver, rest it on here, and just gently pry up in that slot, just like that, to get the valve body loosened up. You can also take your cloth, lay it over on this side, and come over in this corner right here and just give it a gentle pry, just like that, just to be sure you've had everything, you've got everything loosened up properly. And once it starts to move, you should be able to lift it up by hand and get this thing out of your way. Another thing is the filter. You have a grommet seal right in here for your filter, and if the seal if it stays in there when you take your filter out, no big deal. You can gently pry that out with a screwdriver. You just have to be careful not to score or damage the bore. If the seal's in good shape and nice and pliable, you could reuse the one, reuse it, not disturb it. But just be careful taking this out that you don't do any damage to the bore with a screwdriver or whatever prying device that you are using. Alright, now you're going to have some fluid come out when this valve body comes up. It's no big deal. Okay, there we go. So that's what you're left with once the valve body comes off. I'm just going to let this drain a little bit here. Just be careful that you make sure your shift piston, your rod here that I'm moving with my finger, make sure you don't let it fall out or anything. Just kind of keep it in position there. In my case, I'm just going to tilt the transmission a little bit just to drain some excess fluids. I just try my best to prevent a huge mess when I'm working on these things. It just helps things go a little bit smoother. I've got some lint-free wiping cloths that I use just to soak up residual oil, fluids, things like that. I use these things in a lot of different applications. They're just really handy because they don't leave any lint behind like a cotton cloth might, and you run less risk of any fibers getting down into the workings of the transmission that might possibly cause a valve to stick or a solenoid, you know, something like that, that may potentially hang up a valve or piston assembly and cause a problem. Just kind of dab everything and keep it as clean as possible. It kind of lets you look at things a little bit closer, see things a little better as you're tearing into this. For all you brave souls out there that want to tear into their own transmission, see if they can try their luck at a successful repair, which is fantastic if you can. Kind of makes you feel good about what you can do and save a little bit of money. So if you've got the time and you have another vehicle to drive and can put your transmission in the shop, in your garage or wherever, spend a little time with it, learn about it, take it apart, put it back together, you'll be very happy. The next step after the valve body is out of the way, we want to go ahead and get our manual shift lever assembly out of there, and that way we can get the EPC solenoid out. Now remember, we took the pin out, which was right back here. I'll move this, I don't know if you can see that or not, but we took the little roll pin out that retains this shift lever in the housing. Now it's free to slide back and forth. The second step is to take this nut off of the end of the shaft, and this nut retains the shift lever here, the cam assembly. So what we're going to do is take a couple of tools. I usually take a 1/2 inch wrench, put it on these flats right here just to hold it, hold the end of the shaft while I'm loosening this nut, and I'll take one hand, hold that wrench, and kind of grasp the transmission case all at the same time. Just kind of hold it in place, because this nut can be a little bit tight, and when you get the wrench on here on this nut, you may have to tap it with a hammer a few times in order to break this nut loose. And so we'll see if we can make this happen. As you can see, I've got this larger wrench on the nut. I've got the 1/2 inch wrench on the flats on the outer part of the shaft, on the outside part of the shaft. And I've tapped it a little bit already, so I'm just going to go ahead and tap it here. Remember, I've got a good grasp both on the 1/2 inch wrench and on the transmission case, just trying to keep it in place as I tap on this. There we go. Okay, so you want to be careful, you know, don't bang it so hard you're going to hit the wrench against your aluminum case here and do any, you know, potential damage. So right now that broke it loose. So at this point I should be able to unscrew the nut and at the same time back the shaft out as the nut is being unscrewed, and get this assembly out here. Now there's also you got the parking pawl rod that goes in towards the rear of the transmission, so just keep in mind, don't let it get in a bind, or, you know, keep an eye on it, don't let it get damaged in the process of loosening this stuff up. And I'm loosening that nut. Alright, the nut is off of the threads. So at this point, I just let the nut drop down into the case as I can retrieve it from where it's at. Now I want to just wiggle the cam off the manual shift lever, and that will allow me to go ahead and remove this shaft assembly, just like that. So you can tell that's the outer part. I kind of marked it right there so I'll know how it lines up when it all goes back together with the digital range selector. So there you go. That's that part. So we'll put this aside, and then we'll go ahead and grab our manual shift lever assembly and rod. So there you have it there. Okay, put that aside. Alright, that should allow us to go ahead and remove the TCC solenoid. And out it comes. So this is your TCC solenoid. Alright, that's what that looks like. Two terminals with the transmission upside down here, valve body facing up. It slides right in like that. Okay, and then we'll get the nut, put that over here. By the way, when you put this back together, you're wondering where that roll pin, where it engages this shaft. Typically it will engage the shaft right here in this groove. It's in the middle of the shaft, and it will slide into place just like that, and you'll be able to feel that this has to be lined up in the proper position, everything together, as far as the nut and the rod and the manual shift lever. All that has to be together because that helps line the shaft up in the proper position for this roll pin to go down into the hole and engage that groove. One thing to note before I forget, and don't mention this at all, is on the valve body assembly, when you're loosening up all of the bolts, there's two different lengths. There's the long ones that will go on the dark gray colored plate. There's 11 of those. And then there's shorter bolts that go along the perimeter of the valve body. So that constitutes the remainder of the bolts that you pull out. So 11 longer bolts, they'll go onto the darker gray valve body plate you'll see in the very top middle section. So just a little side note in case you get confused about where the long bolts go, where the shorter ones go. Next step, we're going to go ahead and pull the interconnector out, and this will pull straight up just like this. Okay, just like so. So it pulls, you know, you don't pull it out from the outer part of the transmission, you pull it out from inside the transmission pan. Just pull it straight up and you'll be good to go. This one here I'm not really fond of. I noticed it had, I don't know, it had a little bit of weird look to the connector here, so just make sure, I want to check this over a little bit closer, but just make sure that nothing's cracked or broken. You have a good seal on this, good O-ring seal, mainly no cracked or loose connector ends and or damaged terminals there, so that could be a deal breaker for you right there off the bat. And then I'm going to go ahead and remove the gasket, the valve body gasket here. Most of the time it will just peel straight up. Sometimes you have to use a razor blade, something like that, to get it started. Might have a sticky spot or two. A lot of times you can just get it peel straight on off, just like so. Look everything over, look at the worm tracks, and you can get a good idea of how clean or how dirty your transmission is at this point, and kind of give you a heads up as to how much prep and cleaning you're really going to have to do. This looks pretty clean actually overall. Still don't like the looks of the magnet in the pan. It had quite a bit of small metallic fibers, which indicates a lot of clutch band wear, most likely, and most likely on that overdrive clutch. So we're going to get into that pretty soon, because we're going to be getting into the 1-2 and 2-3 servos, and then the overdrive servo disassembly, and that'll be probably one of the next things we'll do here at this point. Upon removal of the manual shift lever shaft through this hole here, make sure that as you pull it out of this bore, make sure you don't score, scratch, gouge the bore as you're pulling the shaft out, because if you do, when you put the shaft in with the new seal, that seal may leak. So just be really careful that you don't apply any undue pressure to the shaft as you're pulling it out. Just make sure you pull it out straight. There should be a pump outlet screen right here in this position. There's a small hole down into this cavity, and inserted into that hole and extending out should be a pump outlet screen, oil pump outlet screen. That was not there, which is a good indication that this transmission has been gone through before and serviced, or you know, who knows what, but that screen was missing. If you look at Ford's service instructions, it does instruct to reinstall the screen. So why they did not put a new screen in there, I really don't know. I'll look up some information and see if there's any updates concerning this screen as to whether or not it's supposed to be there. I'm thinking that it is, but I'll verify that. I'm going to take the 2-3 accumulator spring retainer out. I use just a hook style pick, and I just gently place it into one of the holes around the inner circumference of the retainer. Put the pick in there, slide it through, be sure not to let it scratch the bore, and then just pull it right up. So it usually works out pretty well. There's different ways to do it. I mean, you can use a small screwdriver or whatever. Just be careful not to scratch the bore of the valve body case there. Alright, so that's removed. So then we can remove the spring. Okay. And that, when it's in position, sits in there like that. Okay, after the spring is removed, go ahead and reach down and pull up the 2-3 accumulator piston. So you have a kind of a rubberized piston and seal right here. Okay, pull that out, set it aside along with your accumulator retainer. Next thing we're going to remove is the reverse band servo, and this is spring loaded, and you can push down on it with a fair amount of force and feel the movement. The retainer ring is you want to remove in order for this to come out. There is a special tool that you can use that will depress this servo to where you can loosen the retainer ring without this flying out on you. So just be careful if you don't have the special tool and you're going to try to hold it down with your hand or with the wooden end of a hammer, or whatever. Just be careful that you control this in the process of taking your retainer spring out, or your spring retainer, because you don't want parts flying all over the place, hit you in the eye, put an eye out, lose parts, whatever. So, not to mention damaging this bore. So just be careful on removal of this reverse servo, and do your best not to damage anything and keep it controlled. Okay, just pry loose the reverse servo retainer spring. Alright, just have to be real careful getting that out, because you can damage the case if you're not really careful. Alright. reverse servo. If you do have any rough edges in the process of removing this, you can clean up any little rough spots with some very fine emery paper. You know, 600 grit, something like that would be sufficient. Now we're going to remove the 1-2 accumulator cover and retaining ring. Oh my goodness. Pulled this 1-2 retaining cover up. Alright. And we got some dimples and divots in here. Okay. And a little bit of damage on the seal, on the molded seal portion. I want to show you just exactly what I found inside that cover, underneath the 1-2 accumulator cover. Broken spring just laying around in there. Here's the cover, and you can see the damage on that. So we're going to see what's going on here and how much damage we actually have. See if I can get this out of here without doing any more damage on the bore. That's what I'm concerned about now, is scratching and scoring on the bore here. Good gracious. It just fell apart. Let's see how many pieces. We've got the other spring down here. Yeah, this is the 1-2 accumulator. Now that one's in one piece. The bottom spring, or top spring if transmission's right side up. Alright. Now, let's see. There's just a very small nick right there, just very minute. Wow. The rest of it's pretty smooth. I might actually be able to clean that up with a hone. Certainly hope so. Yeah, the spring broke into 4 pieces here and caused damage to the cover and to the piston. Next thing, I'm going to go ahead and remove the overdrive servo piston. This is a pretty stout spring here, so you do want to take care here as well. It's always nice to have a compressor tool to push that in. I don't have one right now for this, but you can. It takes quite a bit of force to push that one down. So it's under a pretty good load. I highly recommend you put some safety glasses on if you're going to try to hold this down with a piece of wood or something along those lines. Okay. Okay. As you pull up on this, it will relieve pressure. The servo, it will relieve pressure against the overdrive clutch band. And if you look right down into this channel in the worm gear tracks, or worm tracks, you can actually see part of the clutch band, and as this comes up you'll see the band kind of release from around the hub. Alright, so that's your overdrive servo. A little bit of nastiness built up in there as well. Set that to the side along with the retainer spring, and then we'll get this, and that's a fairly large spring, and as you can see that's why it's a little stouter than the others. It's a pretty stout spring to deal with. I do recommend getting a tool, a compressing tool for this. And that's it in this bore. I always like to feel around, just kind of see what everything feels like here. See how much cleaning up I'm going to have to do. Not too much. That's pretty much it for now on the valve body area and servos, with the exception of the parking pawl assembly. We're going to go ahead and remove the tail shaft housing, where this particular tail shaft housing connects to the transfer case. We'll go ahead and get that off and get this transmission repositioned to remove the oil pump and all those innards. We'll go ahead and get the tail shaft housing off here. So I'm going to remove this transmission mount. First of all, just get it out of the way. Got a 19mm bolt on this one. Alright, set this down. Okay, that exposes the bolts here so we can get this housing on out of the way. These bolts are sometimes loaded up with sealant on the threads, so they can require some high torque to get them broken loose. So just bear that in mind. You want to be careful not to snap any of these bolts. Hopefully that won't happen on these, but we'll see what we come up with. Here's your 10mm bolts. Looks like they're going to be okay. No big deal. Not too much torque here to get them loose. Just continue getting all your bolts loosened up and get them on out, and that'll get your housing loose. As you can see there, it's already loose there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get these bolts out, and then we'll move on after I get these bolts, and we'll get the housing out of the way. Alright, got the last bolt here for the housing to be removed. So we'll go ahead and get that. Get this out. Alright, and the housing should come straight on off along with the gasket. Okay, just like that. Got the gasket, came off in one piece, no problem, that's good. It's nice and clean in there. I like that. Okay, next thing we're going to do, after getting the extension housing off, we're going to go ahead and remove the parking pawl. There's a shaft right here that runs through the case and through the parking pawl lever. So we're going to go ahead and remove this. Alright, that's your parking pawl shaft, and it looks like it's pretty much the same on each side. There's a little dimple here from where it was on the lathe and being turned down. It was in the outer position, but it doesn't really matter which way, but it goes back in. But I try to orient everything the same way as it came out. It's going to go back in the same way. So you have the shaft. Then you have your lever right down in here. It'll just come right up with the spring. There's a spring attached to the lever, and it will all come out as one piece. So the shaft goes through here, like so. Top of the spring hooks to the transmission case right here. There's a little semicircle relief cut or a relief in the casting, and that's where the spring will attach. Kind of hangs right there. On this parking pawl lever, on the bottom of the lever there's a relief cut, and that's where the spring, the square part of the spring, will attach there, and it will look like this. And the top part of the spring, as you can see, it's facing towards the rear. The hook part is facing towards the rear of the transmission, or towards the tail shaft housing, and goes in like that. At this point, the transmission is ready to be tilted to a vertical position so that we can get the torque converter out and go ahead and get the front pump and all of the internal parts out through the front of the case.